I have told this once to the board that convened afterward, and I swore I would not tell it again. But the men who sat on that board are dead now of ordinary things, old age and bad hearts, and I am the last who stood on the floor of the Ascendant Hall and watched the Osir throne make its choice. So I will set it down plainly, the way it happened, without the shine the histories have since put on it. We were 19. That is the first thing people forget. When they speak of the delegation now, they imagine a great column of us, banners and armor, the whole weight of earth carried into that hall on the shoulders of 1,000 men. There were 19 of us. 14 were staff clerks, a physician, 2 linguists, the protocol people who knew which shoulder an Osir presented when it meant respect, and which it presented when it meant you were already dead to them. 3 were security, and they carried nothing, because the throne did not permit weapons in the hall, and we had agreed to that condition without argument. And then there was Envoy Ardle, who spoke for us, and there was me, who was there to watch the room and report what our envoy could not see while he was busy being looked at. I was a soldier. I want that understood. I had spent my life reading rooms full of people who wanted to hurt each other and deciding how much time we had before they did. That was my trade, and I was good at it, and it is the reason I am the one telling you this instead of one of the others. Because I read that hall correctly from the first minute, and it did me no good at all. The summons had come 3 months earlier. We had put a survey station in the Marrow Reach, a thin corridor of dead systems on the far edge of what the Osir called theirs, though no Osir ship had passed through it in 9 generations. The throne claimed to reach the way, an old family claims a portrait of an ancestor no one alive remembers, not because it wanted the thing, but because letting it go would admit that the family was smaller than it once had been. Our station was a scientific outpost, 40 people in a hydroponics ring, and to the Osir it was a trespass on the body of the ascendancy itself. So they summoned us to answer for it, not to negotiate, to answer. The word they used when the linguists finally cracked the full weight of it was closer to confess. We went because the alternative was to refuse, and refusing an Osir summons was, in their long ledger of insults, the same as spitting on the throne. We were not ready for a war with the ascendancy. Everyone in the room where the decision was made knew that and said it aloud, and it is the reason the histories that came later got the shape of things so wrong. They wrote us as bold. We were not bold. We were careful and frightened, and we sent 19 people into the mouth of an empire because we judged that the price of not going was higher than the price of going. We were wrong about that, but not in the way you would think. Before we left, the man who gave Ardle his instructions gave him 1 sentence to carry. I was in the room. It was not a speech. It was 1 sentence, and it was to be said once at the start plainly, and then never repeated no matter what the throne did. Ardle wrote it on the inside of his wrist in ink so he would not soften it or dress it up. I saw him do it. I did not understand then why a man would need to write 11 words on his own skin to keep himself from improving them. I understood it later, in the last minute I ever saw him standing. The Ascendant Hall was built to make a visitor feel the way an insect feels on a cathedral floor. I have been in throne rooms before and since, and most of them try to overwhelm you with height ceilings you cannot see the top of, so that you spend the whole audience craning upward like a supplicant already. The Osir did the opposite. Their hall was wide. It went out and out in every direction, a floor of pale banded stone under a low dome of milk-colored glass, and the seats rose in shallow tiers all around the edge so that no matter where you stood you were surrounded, encircled, hemmed by the mass of them, and yet the ceiling hung close enough overhead that you could not draw a full breath of the room's air without feeling it pressed down. It was a design that said, "You are small, and there is nowhere to look that is not us, and even the sky is ours and it is lower than you thought." Through the dome that first morning the daylight came down white and even. It was a real sun, the Osir homeworld turned under a mild yellow star, and the glass took the light and spread it flat across the whole chamber so that nothing threw a shadow. That was deliberate too. In that hall no one could hide behind anything, and no one could loom. You stood in it exposed, lit from every side the way a specimen is lit. And through the dome, if you knew to look, you could see our ships. There were 6 of them, holding station in the high daytime sky above the Osir capital, kilometers up and kilometers long, gray against the pale blue. They had come with us as escort, that was the word in every document, in the flight plan the Osir had approved, in the ceremonial protocol both governments had signed. An honor escort befitting a throne of the ascendancy. 6 ships to attend 19 diplomats. The Osir had found it charming. Their court chronicler, a tall stooped creature who followed the high ascendant everywhere with a stylus, had written a note about it that our linguists later recovered, and the note called our escort a quaint provincial custom, like a farmer wearing his grandfather's sword to a wedding. 6 ships. To them it was decoration, a courtesy, a thing you brought to be polite and then forgot about the moment you were inside. I looked at those ships through the dome that first morning, and I felt something I could not name until much later, standing on the same floor with Ardle's blood cooling under the ceremonial fire. What I felt was the strange, floating calm of a man who is carrying a loaded thing into a room full of people who believe it is empty. It is not a good feeling. It is not power. It is the opposite of power. It is the knowledge that you are the only one who understands what is actually in the room, and that this understanding will not save the person about to die. The Osir themselves were beautiful, in the way of things that have never once in their history had to doubt themselves. They were tall a head and more above the tallest of us, and slender, with skin the color of old ivory that had a faint luster to it, as if lit from just beneath the surface. Their heads were long and narrow and swept back, and where a man has hair they had a fixed ridge of pale keratin, and their eyes were large and dark and set wide, and they did not blink the way we do. They blinked slowly, deliberately, a slow shudder, and when a room full of them blinked at once at something you had said, it was like watching a field of dark water close over and then open again, and it meant they had registered you and found you wanting. They wore robes layered so deep and so intricate that the rank of an Osir could be read in the number of folds at the throat, and the high ascendant's robes were so many layered that he seemed less a person than a monument someone had draped. He sat at the far focus of the hall on the high seat, which was not raised. That was the point again, but sunk slightly. A shallow bowl of stone so that he sat at the center and lowest point of the whole encircling mass, and everything in the room ran downhill to him. To approach the high ascendant you walked down. You descended toward him. By the time you reached the floor before the seat, you had come down through the whole weight of the court, and you stood at the bottom of a bowl of 10,000 slow-blinking eyes. His name, the name the histories use, though it is only the first fraction of the true string of it, was Voskren. He had held the throne for the better part of 2 Osir centuries, and in that time he had received the confessions of 9 species that had trespassed on the body of the ascendancy, and 9 species had gone home smaller than they came. He was very old and very sure, and when we descended toward him that first morning he did not look at us. He looked at a point above and past us, at the middle distance, the way a man looks at a door he is waiting for someone unimportant to leave through. It was the most complete dismissal I have ever been shown by a living thing. I have been threatened by experts. I have never been erased so gently. Ardle walked at the front of us. He was not a large man. He was 60, gray, narrow through the shoulders, with a face that had spent a career learning to give away nothing, and he walked down that long descending floor at an even pace, neither hurrying nor dragging. And he stopped at the mark the protocol officers had shown us, the exact point past which one did not step, and he stood. The chronicler read the charge. It took a long time. Osir law is a thing of nested clauses, and the trespass in the Marrow Reach was described in language that made our little hydroponic station into an assault on the dignity of a civilization older than our species' memory. 40 botanists and a water ring, rendered in the grammar of profanation. When the chronicler finished, the hall did its slow collective blink, and the sound that followed, the Osir have a sound they make low in the chest, felt more than heard. A kind of resonant hum rose all around us, and I understood without being told that it was the sound of a court that has already decided and is merely waiting to enjoy the formalities. Then Voskren, still looking at his middle distance, said the ritual thing. The linguists rendered it for us afterward, but I did not need them. The meaning was in the shape of the moment. He invited us to confess, to acknowledge the trespass, to abase the delegation, to offer the ascendancy a correction, which meant to hand back the reach, withdraw every human vessel to a line the throne would draw, and submit the terms of that withdrawal to the court's judgment, which was another way of saying to hand the Asir a knife and bare our throat and thank them for the lesson. And Ardal said his sentence. He did not raise his voice. He did not step forward. He said 11 words in the plain trade tongue both sides used, so that no linguist stood between his mouth and their ears. He said, "Harm the people I speak for, and we will end you." That was all. He did not explain it. He did not soften it or hedge it or wrap it in the diplomatic lace that every other petitioner had brought into that hall. He said the 11 words once, in the flat tone of a man reading a weather report, and then he closed his mouth and stood at his mark and waited, and he did not say them again. I was watching the room because that was my trade, and I saw the thing happen that I have spent the rest of my life turning over. In the first row of the near tier, an Asir, young by the shallowness of the folds at its throat, did not do the slow collective blink. It went still, not the ritual stillness of the court, which was a performance of contempt, a different stillness, the stillness of a creature that has heard a tone it was not expecting and cannot place, and has stopped to listen for it again. I saw that one Asir go quiet in the wrong way, and I filed it. And I did not yet know it was the only Asir in that hall of 10,000 who had understood what had just walked into the room. The rest of them laughed. I do not mean they made our sound. The Asir do not laugh as we do. But the resonant hum broke up into a scattered, higher register, a stuttering of it across the tiers, and the linguists' faces told me what my ears had already guessed. It was delight. It was the delight of a court that has been promised a good afternoon. A small provincial creature had descended into the bowl of the throne and threatened the ascendancy of the Asir with 11 flat words, and the court found it charming, the way you find a child charming when it swears it will fight you. Voskren himself, at last, brought his gaze down from the middle distance and looked at Ardal for the first time, and something moved across that long ivory face that I have no better word for than appetite. He had been given, unexpectedly, a better entertainment than he had planned. He had been given defiance, which meant he had been given the chance to break it. That was the moment the day turned, though none of us knew it yet. If Ardal had abased himself, I believe the throne would have taken the reach and let us go home shamed and whole. But a court that has decided to be amused by you has decided, in the same breath, to make an example of you. And an example must suffer where the whole court can see. They did not kill him at once. That was not the Asir way. The Asir way was the weighing, and the weighing took the better part of 2 days, and I will tell you about it only as much as you need in order to understand what came after, because I have found that the men who tell it in full are telling it to hurt themselves, and I am too old for that. The weighing was a ritual of graduated contempt. Over the 2 days, the court would set the trespasser a series of judgments, each one a small humiliation dressed as a courtesy, and the trespasser's response to each would be weighed, and from the accumulated weight, the throne would render its final measure. A petitioner who bore the humiliations well and abased himself thoroughly might be measured as corrected and sent home. A petitioner who resisted was measured as unrepentant, and the Asir had a great many things they did to the unrepentant, and none of them were quick. They took away our seats first, a small thing, the removal of the low benches we had been given at the edge of the floor, so that for 2 days we stood. They served the court food and drink through the long sessions and served us nothing, so that we stood in the flat white light of that dome, hungry and thirsting, while the Asir ate at their ease and watched us not eat. They summoned Ardal to answer questions that were not questions, riddles of law with no correct answer, each one a trap that could only be sprung, and whatever he said the chronicler recorded his failure. They had one of their own, a jurist with folds down to the waist, deliver a recitation of the crimes of humanity, a catalogue assembled from every contact our two peoples had ever had, every misunderstanding rendered as malice, and the catalogue took most of the first afternoon, and we stood and heard our whole young history read back to us as the indictment of a criminal species. And through all of it, Ardle gave them nothing. I do not mean he defied them. He had said his sentence, and he did not say it again, and he did not add to it, and he did not fight. He simply withheld. When they set him a riddle, he answered it plainly and briefly and did not rise to the bait in it. When they read the catalogue of our crimes, he listened to all of it with the same even attention a man gives to a long weather report, and when it ended, he inclined his head a precise fraction, acknowledging that he had heard it and said nothing. When they took our seats, he stood without comment. When they served us nothing, he did not ask for anything. He gave the weighing no purchase. It is a machine that runs on the trespasser's reactions, on the fear, the anger, the pleading, the breaking, and Ardle simply declined to supply the fuel. He stood in the bowl of the throne for 2 days, and he was courteous and brief and entirely, immovably composed, and the machine spun and found nothing to grip. I watched the court while this went on, because that was still my trade, and over the 2 days I watched the delight in the tears curdle by slow degrees into something else. It is a hard thing to describe to someone who has not stood in a hostile room and felt its mood move. At first the court was enjoying itself. By the middle of the first day it was working. By the end of the first day it was, though not one of them would have used the word, unsettled. They had brought a provincial creature into the bowl to break it, and the creature was not breaking, and worse, far worse, to a court whose whole identity was built on the certainty that everything beneath it could be made to grovel. The creature did not seem to be trying not to break. It seemed simply not to be the kind of thing that broke. There is a difference, and the Osir felt it, and it frightened them in a place they did not have a name for, and because they were frightened they grew crueler, which is the oldest law of frightened powerful things. The young Osir in the first row, the one I had marked, did not eat during the weighing. I noticed that on the second day. The court fed itself and watched us starve, and that one Osir let its own food sit untouched on the ledge before it, and it watched Ardle with the stillness I had seen at the very start, and I understood that whatever it had heard in the 11 words on the first morning, it was still hearing it, and it had stopped being able to pretend it was charming. By the evening of the second day the weighing was complete. The chronicler tallied the measure, and Voskren from the bottom of the bowl rendered the throne's judgment. The delegation of the small provincial species was measured unrepentant, and for the correction of the unrepentant, for the instruction of a young and prideful people who did not yet understand their place beneath the ascendancy, the throne would take the one who had spoken. The throne would make of the envoy an example that would travel home with the rest of us, and be told and retold on every human world, so that humanity would learn, in the only grammar it apparently understood, what it cost to threaten the Osir. They would burn him, in the hall, before the whole court, in the morning under the white light of the dome, so that the last thing the trespasser saw would be his own escort hanging useless in the sky above him. We had one night. They returned us to the chambers where we had been kept, and they left us there, and for the first hours no one spoke. I have thought many times about what we might have done that night. We were 19 unarmed people in the heart of an empire. There was no rescue to attempt, no wall to go over, no bribe that meant anything to a court that already owned everything. We could have begged. We discussed it. One of the linguists, a decent man who could not bear what was coming, put it forward that Ardle should abase himself in the morning fully, the way the weighing had demanded, and perhaps the throne would relent and merely take the reach and let us all go home. It was not a cowardly thing to say. It was the human thing. It was the sound a person makes when someone they respect is going to die in front of them, and there is a door, however small, that might still be closed. Ardle heard him out. Then he pushed back the sleeve of his coat and showed us the inside of his wrist, where the 11 words were written in ink that had not yet worn away. "We told them," he said. That was all he said about it. We told them. And I understood, finally, the thing I had not understood in the room where he was given the sentence. The promise was not a threat we had made to frighten the throne into good behavior. It was a description of what would happen, stated in advance, so that whatever the throne did next, it did with full knowledge. We had not come to bargain. We had come to deliver a single true sentence and to be sure it was heard. Everything after that was the throne's to choose, and the throne had chosen. I did not sleep. I sat by the narrow window of that chamber which looked up through a slot of open air at the night sky, and I watched the place where I knew our 6 ships were holding, though at night I could not see them. And I did the arithmetic that a soldier does. I knew what those 6 ships were. I knew what they carried and what they could do and how long it would take them to do it. I had known since we boarded that the word escort was a courtesy we had extended to the Ossier, a fiction we let them keep so that they would let the ships come close. And I sat by that window in the dark, and I understood that in the morning the fiction was going to end, and I felt no triumph in it at all. I felt sick, because Ardle was going to die first. That was the shape of the thing. The promise could not be kept until the throne had done the thing the promise was about. He had to die for the sentence to be true. And he knew it, and he had known it when he wrote the words on his wrist, and he had walked down into the bowl of the throne carrying that knowledge behind a face that gave away nothing, and I had stood beside him for 2 days and had not seen the weight of it because he had not let me see it. That is the part I have never told anyone until now. Not that he was brave. Brave is a small word for it. That he carried the whole of it alone, so that the rest of us would not have to, and he was courteous to the end. And I did not know until the last morning what it had cost him to be. They burned him at mid-morning, when the light through the dome was at its whitest. They brought us back into the hall and made us stand at our mark, the 18 of us who remained, and they brought Ardle down the long descending floor between 2 of the court's wardens, and the whole court was assembled to watch, 10,000 of them in the tiers, and the resonant hum was going, low and pleased, the sound of a court that expected to enjoy its morning. At the bottom of the bowl before the high seat they had set the thing they used. I will not describe it. It was ceremonial. It was old. The Ossier had a great deal of ritual invested in the burning of the unrepentant, and every part of it was designed to be watched, and I have spent 40 years keeping the sight of it out of my dreams, and I am not going to put it into yours. They gave Ardle the last courtesy of their law, which was the chance to abase himself even then at the edge of the fire and be spared. The chronicler asked him the ritual question: would the trespasser confess and beg the ascendancy's correction and live? Ardle looked up the long bowl at Voskren on the high seat, and he said the second and last thing I ever heard him say in that hall. He did not repeat the promise. He said in the same flat, even, weather report voice, "You were told." 3 words. And then he closed his mouth, and he did not plead, and he did not weep, and he did not look away, and he let them do it. I will not tell you about the doing of it. I will tell you about the room, because the room is the thing you need. The court had come to see a trespasser break. In the last moment they wanted the thing all cruel powers want, which is not the death itself but the surrender that precedes it, the plea, the collapse, the confession that the power was right all along and the small thing beneath it was wrong. It is the only thing that actually feeds them. The death is nothing. Any brute can take a life. What the throne hungered for was the abasement, and Ardle did not give it. He gave them his death and he withheld his surrender, and those are not the same gift. And the Ossier had built their entire 2-day ritual, their whole grammar of empire, on the belief that they were. So the court got its burning, and it got no surrender, and the resonant hum in the tiers, which had risen to a pitch of anticipation as the thing began, faltered. I heard it falter. I was watching the room, because it was the only thing I could do that was not screaming, and I heard 10,000 Ossier arrive, at slightly different speeds, at the understanding that they had done a terrible thing and got nothing back. They had spent the death and come away poorer. and into the silence where the hum had been, the young Osseer in the first row, the one I had marked on the first morning, the one who had not eaten, rose from its seat. Just stood alone in a court where no one stood, and it was looking not at Ardle and not at the throne, but up, through the dome, at the sky, at the escort. And I understood that it, alone in that whole hall, had heard the 11 words correctly 2 days before and had spent 2 days waiting, sick, for the morning to prove it right. We did not speak. We had agreed on that in the chamber the night before. Ardle had asked it of us, the last instruction he gave. No speeches, no curses, no grand words flung at the throne. Whatever we felt, we were to carry it out of that hall in silence, because the sentence had already been said on the first morning once, and anything we added now would only be noise laid over the one true thing. So we did not speak. 2 of our security people and I went down the long floor, past the wardens, who did not stop us because stopping us was not in their ritual, and they did not know what to do with people who simply walked toward the fire. And we gathered what the throne had left of our envoy, and we wrapped him in the flag we had brought folded in a case for exactly the purpose we had prayed we would not need it for, and we carried him back up the long ascending floor between the tiers of the silent court. The 18 of us, and we walked out of the ascendant hall of the Osseer throne, and we did not look back, and we did not say one word. Behind us Voskren was still on the high seat. I glanced at him once at the top of the floor before the great doors. He had not moved. He was looking at us go, and the appetite was gone off that long ivory face, and in its place was the first faint edge of a thing I do not think the throne had felt in 2 centuries. Not fear yet. He was too old and too sure for fear to reach him quickly. It was the thing that comes before fear. It was doubt. He had done the thing he had done 100 times, the thing that had always produced a broken and grateful and diminished species that went home to teach its children to kneel. And it had not worked. And he did not yet know why, and he was beginning, in the pit of whatever an Osseer has, to suspect that the not knowing was the most dangerous thing that had ever happened to him. He was right about that. We reached our transport on the surface. We put Ardle aboard. We lifted, and we cleared the atmosphere, and we made the rendezvous with the escort, the 6 gray ships hanging in the high sky that the court's chronicler had called a farmer's grandfather's sword. And there, in the quiet of the flagship's bridge, I did the last thing my orders required of me, which was to confirm with my own eyes and my own hand that the thing the throne had done had in fact been done, that the envoy was dead, because the promise was conditional, and the condition was terrible, and no one, not the men who wrote the sentence, not the fleet that carried it out, was permitted to act on it until it was certain that the throne had chosen. We had bound ourselves as tightly as we had bound them. The sentence said harm the people I speak for. It did not say threaten or insult or humiliate. The Osseer had done all of those things over 2 days, and none of them had tripped the condition. It was the death that tripped it. Only the death. The throne had had, at every hour of those 2 days, the power to stop short of it, and we had had no power at all to act until they did not. I confirmed it. I put my hand on the case that held him, and I said the words the order required, and the fleet commander, a woman I had known 20 years, closed her eyes for a moment and then opened them, and gave the order that the 6 ships had come all this way to give. I have heard the Osseer believed in the days that followed that we had lured them, that the whole delegation had been bait, 19 lives spent to bring 6 warships within range of the capital, an elaborate provocation dressed as diplomacy. They could not conceive of it any other way. To a mind like the throne's, a promise is always a lie, a threat is always a bluff, and a small thing that walks into your bowl and says harm us and we will end you is always running a game, because in the whole long history of the Osseer, no small thing had ever simply meant it. They had spent 2 centuries teaching every species they touched that the words did not matter, that only the power mattered, that a promise was a card you played and never a thing you were actually bound to. And so when a species arrived that meant its words exactly, precisely, to the letter, that had said the true thing once and would neither soften it nor take it back nor act on it 1 hour before the condition was met, the throne had no grammar to hear it. It heard a bluff because a bluff was the only thing it knew how to hear, and it called the bluff. And the bluff was not a bluff. It never had been. It had been a description, given in advance in good faith of exactly what would happen. We had told them. He had written it on his wrist so he would not soften it. You were told. What the 6 ships did is a matter of record, and I will not walk through it, because the record is enough, and because I was on the bridge for it and I have carried the sound of it for 40 years and I do not lend it out. It was not vengeance. I want that understood because the histories have made it into vengeance and it was not. Vengeance is a feeling, and there was no feeling in it. It was the keeping of a promise. It was the completion of a sentence that had been begun on the first morning in the bowl of the throne, and the Asir themselves had chosen the word that finished it. Every ship that fired that day fired under an order that named the condition and confirmed it met. We were as bound by the 11 words as they were. That is the part the histories cannot hold, because the histories want either heroes or monsters, and we were neither. We were people who had said a true thing, and then were made, by the choice of the throne, to make it true. The ascendancy did not end in a day. Empires do not. But the Asir throne, the high seat, the ascendant hall, the whole 2,000-year edifice of a power that had never once doubted itself, the throne ended in the sense that matters, which is that after that day no species that had ever knelt to it believed it had to kneel again. The thing the throne had lived on was not its fleets. It was the certainty, spread across 100 worlds, that the Asir could not be answered. Ardal took that certainty into the bowl and would not surrender it, and made them burn him to prove it was already gone, and the 6 ships only wrote in the sky what he had already written on his wrist. Within a generation the ascendancy was a name and a border and a memory. The worlds it had held drew back from it the way a tide draws back, without hurry, without needing to be told, simply because the thing that had held them in place was no longer there. Voskren lived to see the start of it. I am told he did not understand it to the end. I am told that in his last years he still called it treachery, still believed the delegation had been a trap, because the alternative, that a small provincial species had told him the truth to his face, and he had been too certain to hear it, was a thing his mind was not built to hold. I am the last of the 19. The others went the way people go. I have outlived the board that questioned me and the government that sent us and most of the worlds that argued afterward about whether what we did was justice or atrocity, an argument I have never once joined, because I stood on that floor and they did not, and the argument is for people who need the day to be simpler than it was. I will tell you the one thing I have kept for myself, and then I am done. On the morning they burned him in the last minute, when the chronicler asked the ritual question, and Ardal looked up the long bowl at the throne and said his 3 flat words, "You were told." I was close enough to see his face, and I have never told anyone what was in it, because the histories would have made it into defiance, and it was not defiance. There was no defiance in it. There was no fear in it either, though he had every right to be afraid, and I believe he was, somewhere he did not let show. What was in his face in the last minute was sorrow. He was sorry, not for us, he had made his peace with what it would cost him. He was sorry for them, for the throne, for the whole assembled court that was about to do the thing that would end it, and did not know, and could still have chosen otherwise, and would not, because 2,000 years of never being answered had made them deaf to the one true sentence a man had carried across the stars to say to them plainly, once, so that they would have the chance to hear it. He mourned them before they fell. That is the thing I have carried. Not that humanity was strong that day. We were not strong. 6 ships against an empire is not strength. It is only arithmetic, and arithmetic is cold comfort at the edge of a fire. What we were that day was true. We said the true thing once, and we did not take it back, and we did not act on it 1 hour early, and we let the throne choose with full knowledge, and it chose, and then we kept our word. That is all. That is the whole of it. And the man who carried the word looked up at the ones who were about to make him keep it, and the last thing on his face was grief that they would not listen. You were told, he said. They were.